So let's talk about something that is more significant and important than an individual stock pick. Charlie Munger, who many of you may know is the partner of Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, has a famous statement about not doing things that will hurt you. He says, "Tell me where I'm going to die, and I will make sure that I never go there." Now, it's a funny statement, but the thought behind it is driven by the concept of inversion. If you invert a problem, that will help you arrive at a more robust solution to that problem. And another person who talks about this subject is fictional, but his reasoning and deduction are as sound as any real person, Sherlock Holmes. He says, and I think I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says that if you eliminate all the impossible options, then what you are left with is the truth. And similarly, in investing, we need to use this concept and eliminate all the bad options, because if you do that, then what you are left with are the non bad options. And if you work with these non bad options, then your chances of failing are significantly reduced, both at the individual stock level and also at the portfolio construction level. So it's very important to think about this this question of where we should not be investing, and I would highly recommend that any investor should start there. In addition to this, we need to tackle a secondary question, which is who should or should not invest. We need to look at ourselves, our context, our situation, and make a call whether we should be investing in equities, first of all. And if we need to be investing in equities, then should we be doing it ourselves as active investors, or can we delegate that task to a professional like a fund manager or an investment advisor? And before we do both these things or tackle both these questions, we need to get clarity on the concept of something called time horizon. So I like to think of time horizon as the time period for which we can deploy funds without disturbing them. That means for how long can we uh, deploy funds without having to withdraw those funds out of the investment that we put it in. And to help us think through this concept of time horizon, uh, let's divide our savings into three buckets. And I use the word savings specifically because we're not talking about leverage investment. We're not talking about borrowing to invest. We are talking about people who are saving their hard-earned money, and that's the money, and a portion of that money they can invest. So divide your savings into three buckets: the immediate, the short term, and the long term. The immediate bucket in time period terms is around 0 to 6 months. The short term bucket is 6 months to 2 to 3 years, and the long term bucket is 3 plus or preferably 5 plus years. So, bucket number one, immediate. First, you have to fill that bucket. This is for expenses over the next 6 months. You will just leave it in a savings account. There is nothing to be done with it. And once this bucket is filled, then you can move on to bucket number two, which is the short term bucket. This you will fill with money that is to be used for some large expected expenses over the next 2 to 3 years. It could be a car, it could be a wedding in the family, it could be college fees, things like that. This money also, I would say, you don't have to be too adventurous with it. You can leave it in 2 to 3 bank fixed term deposits, and the interest rate really is not very important. The idea is to be safe. Of course, some advanced investors can look at some debt funds or debt securities, but it's just better to be safe with the money and and not do anything drastic. Once these two buckets are filled, then you can move on to bucket number three. But if you're a slightly more conservative investor, then these buckets will be slightly larger, both in terms of time period and in terms of the amount of money that you put in it. And if you're a less risk averse investor, then these buckets will be slightly smaller. Remember that these buckets are there as a cushion so that the overflow, so that whatever surplus is there can move into bucket number 3, and that is the bucket that uh, can be used to invest in long-term higher yielding assets. Now, obviously, as life goes on, you can adjust for life events. You can move money from bucket number 2 to 1 and 3 to 2, but the basic concept is that once the first two buckets are filled, then you start filling bucket number 3, and this is the bucket that gives us our clarity on what the time horizon is for our funds, as well as what the asset class should be for the funds in bucket number 3. What this if you think about your savings and investments in this way, then it will do another thing. It will eliminate a lot of the noise that is there in the financial markets regarding this product or that product, and it will give you clarity on how to select the right investment option for you. um, the main reason that we think about it, think about time horizon, is because equity is inherently a highly volatile asset class in the short term. And this short term volatility can be harmful, can be stressful for some people, and some people even correctly consider it as a risk to their portfolio. And by setting this time horizon for this bucket number 3 to 5+ years, we are essentially uh, taking out the effect of short-term volatility on our portfolio. So we are neutralizing the effect of short-term volatility uh, on our investments and on our decision making. This concept of time horizon and volatility is even more important in the case of small caps, because small caps tend to be more volatile and can be more risky. But like I said, if you think about it in the long term, then it is not necessarily risk. But the reason that small caps are more volatile is because they tend to be little or sometimes quite a bit less liquid than the large caps. And the traders and speculators who are investing in these companies correctly see this volatility as risk, because to them it actually is risk. They can lose much more money over 6 to 12 months in a small cap versus a large cap. So now that we have this clarity on time horizon, uh, we can do a very important thing, which is eliminate some asset classes completely. So the first thing is we can eliminate all fixed income securities for bucket number 3 for the long term investments. And the reason we do that is because over that kind of time horizon, over that many number of years, fixed income securities are highly exposed to interest rate and inflation risk. And even if you try to invest in short term fixed income securities and roll it over, you will still be exposed to reinvestment risk. So fixed income securities is out. As far as gold and real estate goes, I would say that in some very specific circumstances, it might be okay. But in general, again, for the long term, my opinion and recommendation is that it is to be avoided. So now that we have some clarity on time horizon, which is long, and asset class, which is equities, we can look at ourselves and decide whether this the equity investing should be done by ourselves or by a professional. So to help us do that, I would divide you know uh, investors into 4 different categories. The first would be, I have a day job, I have a family, I'm busy, I don't really have an inclination or a passion for investing, and it's generally more of a requirement or a need rather than something that I would enjoy doing. Uh, That is category number one. Second category would be that I do enjoy investing. I like making the decisions. It gives me a bit of a high in terms of activity. The element of chance excites me. I like trading. I like being busy with buying and selling securities. I even like discussing stock tips or uh, you know stock tips or stock ideas with friends at social gatherings, and generally an enjoyable activity for me. Uh, Third category would be similar to category number one, but they have an inclination for the subject. There is a passion for the subject, and they are talented in the areas of finance and accounting. So it could be a chartered accountant, it could be an MBA in finance. So they have some training, and they are willing to put in uh, a fair amount of time in the evenings or on the weekends to do this activity. Uh, and then category number four, which would be people who have plenty of time on their hands and they're willing to learn and willing to go up a learning curve uh, by reading, by spending time uh, doing this activity. It could be a graduate student, it could be stay-at-home spouse, someone of that of that profile. So these are the four categories that I would broadly say are investors in equities. And straight away, categories number one and two, my recommendation is that we should not be investing actively in equities. We need to find a professional to do this for us for different reasons. Category one, because there's no time or inclination. Category two, because it's not a temperament that I would recommend for this activity. Uh, there is there is no harm in doing a little bit of it. I mean, you can categorize it into hobby versus investments, uh, and you can set aside some money for the hobby. But it's this category should not be investing their hard-earned savings and their family savings into equities themselves. So category three and four could look at directly investing in equities. One final thing we need to do before we actually get into the details of where we should not be investing is to set expectations uh, of what kind of returns we can get in equities. And just to set a bar for us, let's look at what equities has done in India over the last 10 years. So currently, as of today, the Nifty is at around 13,000. 10 years ago, it was close to 6,000. And that's roughly 8.5% compounded per year over a period of 10 years. Now, this should give us a sense of not that we may expect this over the next 10 years, but that you should not be expecting the market to be very different from the return that you would get over that same time period, because the market itself is a combined result of the opinions, expertise, and knowledge of an entire country. I mean, this is the Nifty, which means all the investors in India have arrived at a judgment about the price levels, and that is what uh, a Nifty graph over the last 10 years will show us. Now, as an active investor, your task is to beat the Nifty. Otherwise, there's no point in actually being an active investor, because you might as well then invest in an exchange traded Nifty exchange traded fund, which is very low in expenses, and you will get the result that the Nifty will get. So your task is to beat it. Like I said, it has the Nifty contain the combined uh, knowledge of the entire country. And so it's good to begin with a dose of humility as you look at this process. The advantage that we have as individual investors is that the amount of money that we are investing is relatively small. So we are investing a few lakhs or a few crores in a market that is worth multi-trillion dollars, right? So our job is to actually find places or moments of inefficiency in this very, very huge market with our small amount of capital. There is no free lunch, nothing is guaranteed, but uh, there is no better option either. So this investing in equities over the long term can be viewed as being exposed to risk, but also being the least worst option that is available to us. And like I said, if the market is earning 8.5%, then don't come with an expectation of 25% because that's just not going to happen. Uh, and the advantage of being reasonable with our expectations is it will prevent us from being tempted to take a drastic course of action or invest in something that looks very, very promising with high returns, but then there might be some unknown risk that we would be caught unawares by. So again, to recap, we have small capital, couple of lakhs, couple of crores, and that is an advantage. So we can afford to be much more selective than a large institutional investor. And this is not necessarily true for the large investor. As our capital grows, we will have to be less and less selective as we go along. And of course, institutional investors that are managing thousands of crores have to broaden their horizon and may not be able to be as selective as we can be. So finally, let's look at what are the areas that we could avoid when we begin the investment process. And obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the more important areas that we could eliminate. The first one is companies that have low return on assets. So that is nothing, return on assets is nothing but the total net profit earned by a company divided by the total number of assets that have been deployed in its operations. So, if a company is not very efficient in utilizing its assets, it could be a factory, it could be the raw material, then it is not going to have uh, high return on assets, it will have low return on assets. And remember that the whole point in a capitalist system is to be able to squeeze as much as possible out of every rupee that is invested. That rupee is fungible, so uh, if it is not earning good returns in a specific company, it can always move to some other place. Now, in our case, if we avoid this area completely, then it will eliminate many of the capital intensive companies and industries that are available, and that is actually a desired result for us. The second area we look at is to avoid is companies with high debt. So as everybody has seen in 2020 with the pandemic, the business environment and the environment around a company can change very, very quickly. And if a company has high levels of debt, then the interest payments are fixed and inevitable, and that leaves the company in a very inflexible position if the situation changes. And it also becomes then a much less robust part of the portfolio. And all of us understand that at a personal level, high levels of debt are dangerous. And in most cases, this is true when it comes to the company finances as well. Um, as a consequence of the first two areas that we want to avoid, the the natural area that we need to avoid is banking and financial services. because banks naturally have a low return on assets and they are very highly leveraged institutions. They can also be an exception to the first two areas, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But banks are essentially highly leveraged. They take on high levels of liabilities on their balance sheet in the form of customer deposits, and therefore, because of this high leverage, if the economy is doing well, banks tend to have the higher amplitude in their uh, results over that period. And similarly, on the downside, if the economy is not doing too well, then NPAs tend to rise and bank operations suffer more than the general economy. So it's advisable for for most investors to avoid this completely. However, the advanced investor can look at it mainly because the high levels of leverage are a part of the business model itself. So there is no other way to run a bank. But even the professional investors know that it's quite difficult and complex to analyze and study a bank's operations, and there are low levels of visibility in terms of the data that comes out of banks. Partly because of constraints that they may have in reporting, and in some cases because regulations specify something and the banks are just following those regulations. So, for example, if you want line by line granular data on the loans given by a bank, that is not available to an analyst. Next, we look at companies that have high operating leverage, and that is nothing but companies that have a high fixed cost, which can't be, reduced at quick notice if there is a change in operating revenue, or if revenues get affected for any reason. And it's completely legitimate for a company to have high fixed costs if that is what the business model requires. So if a company needs to invest upfront in plant or equipment, then it will tend to have high fixed costs, because the idea is that those uh, plants and equipments will help it deliver on products and services in the future. But if those revenues don't materialize, and if they materialize but then reduce later, then then it can very quickly go from a high level of profitability to a low level, or even into losses. So companies that have high operating leverage tend to have a higher volatility in their operating metrics. And we've looked at volatility and short-term volatility in the case of stock prices, and uh, we have decided that that is not something that will affect our decisions. But in terms of the operating metrics of the company, if there's short or long-term volatility, then that is something to look at and take note of and be cautious about. Um, Next, we look at companies that produce commodities. Um, and in general, it is to be avoided, but we need to define what is a commodity. And I like to do that from the point of view of the customer. So if I can very easily switch from one product or service to another without too much effort, for a small reduction in cost price to me, then I would consider that as a commodity. So I'll give you a personal example of what is not a commodity. I like Amul butter. I've been having it all my life. If somebody comes to me with another brand of butter and says, okay, you can have this at 20% less, I am not going to switch my brand of butter, right? So that's not a commodity. But if if I was booking an air ticket from Mumbai to San Francisco, and via, let's say, London Heathrow on British Airways, and I was offered a ticket via Frankfurt on Lufthansa for 20% less, then it would not take me too much time to click a couple of times and change my itinerary, right? So while this is a at a personal level, the job of an investor is to look at the customer base as a whole, look at the product or the service, and make an assessment of whether that product or service is a commodity on average. Uh, One exception to the commodity company could be if the company has a significant cost advantage on the supply or production side. So, so if that is the case, then you may see sustained levels of profitability if there is that kind of advantage. It's quite a rare occurrence. So in general, I would say just avoid the commodity space. Um, there are some companies and sectors where sustained levels of profitability are seen, even though they're managing or manufacturing commodities or producing commodities. But one of the reasons tends to be that there is some level of cartelization in those sectors. Next, uh, just carrying on from the commodity theme is sectors or companies that have high competition and also have high levels of threat from substitution or obsolescence. So for example, if you're studying a newspaper company, you not only have to look at what the competitors are doing, but you also have to analyze what is the level of threat from digitization, digital marketing, and from advertisers moving from one channel to the other. Because high levels of competition and high threat levels of substitution can be a very big source of pressure on a company's operations over a period of time. And remember, our time horizon is 5+ years, so it is important for us to consider these factors because it's not enough to make a call that the company will earn this year and next year, but we need to look a little bit into the future. And so this area becomes a little more unpredictable if these factors are present. So it's better to, as much as possible, better to avoid. The next area is not really an area of investment, but it is an area of our own time where we should not be investing disproportionate uh, amounts. So it's a little bit of a nuanced point. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to be, we need to equally or based on merit assign the amount of time we spend on research in various categories of companies or various market cap levels of companies. So large, we're talking about large, mid, and small cap. SEBI defines large cap as the top 100 companies, uh, mid cap as the next 150, and the remaining of 5,000 companies are defined as small cap by the by SEBI. Now, if you are watching business or finance TV, or if you are reading research reports from sell side analysts, or if you are on social media uh, talking about companies, 80 to 90% of the time and material in these discussions is those 250 companies, so large and mid cap. And that is not a surprise because 80 to 90% of the money, which includes large and institutional investors, uh, is invested in those large and mid cap companies. Only a very small portion of the total market cap is in the remaining small cap companies. But there is no reason for us, if we are a small individual investor, to follow the same levels of um, attention that the overall market is following. We need to be an equal opportunity research analyst, which means that the amount of time we spend on any company, small or large cap, needs to be driven by the merit of that idea or that opportunity that is in front of you. And in the end, when you decide to make an investment and make it part of the portfolio, you might have a position size of 5 to 10%, and it really doesn't matter as far as you are concerned whether it's a large cap or a small cap. All that matters is how much it will grow over time. So there is no point just blindly following what the rest of the market is doing, because we are a different type of investor than a large part of the market. So what ends up happening is we become a flexi cap portfolio, which basically means that you go wherever the opportunity is, and if that means 50% of your portfolio is small cap, then so be it. Uh, One other important factor to consider is that for any given individual position, you will be ending up spending much more time on a large cap analysis or research than a small cap, purely because the large cap operations are more complex. There are many more subsidiaries, many more companies that you have to analyze, a much larger set of businesses that you may have to analyze. And so it's actually much, if you can find the right ideas, it's actually much more efficient to work with the small cap companies. Next, we move on to public sector units, and this is an area where two reasonable people can certainly have a difference. And I personally am well aware of the high quality of men and women who work at public sector units in India, and also the men and women who are running these companies, the bureaucrats. But what is the issue as an analyst, as an investor? The issue here is that when I am studying a company, a very important part of that is to assess the management and ownership structure of a company and the quality of that management and ownership. So, for example, if I have made the assessment that an Aditya Puri or a CP Gurnani is a good CEO, then I want some level of assurance that that situation or that person will continue with that company for as long a period of time as possible. Similarly, if the company I'm looking at has Anand Mahindra as chairman, then it gives me some level of assurance in terms of the kind of decisions that will be made under his chairmanship. And again, I would like the assurance that that situation will continue for as long as possible. That is not available in public sector units, because, and it is hard enough to uh, to make an investment, to come upon a good investment opportunity without having to deal with management and ownership that is changing every 3 to 5 years, which happens in the case of government companies. The government changes every 5 years, and the bureaucrats also change relatively quickly. So, it's something that if it's something that if this were to happen in a private company and ownership and management were changing, you would actually look at it quite cautiously. Now, it's not to say, again, I'm making the point that it's not as if the PSUs have anything wrong with them. I mean, for example, a State Bank of India at most prices would be a better investment option than 80% of the companies out there. But remember, we are selecting 15 companies out of 5,000. So our selectivity ratio is 0.3%, right? And so SEBI making the 20% cut is not necessarily a bar that is high enough for us. Our bar has to be higher, our selectivity has to be much higher, and so we can safely afford to eliminate PSUs from our consideration. And the next one is IPOs. This is relatively straightforward. IPOs are highly marketed events, and in general, it's just a good idea to avoid, uh, especially in the financial industry, products that are heavily sold. The IPO market also tends to be a very trading oriented market, so a lot of demand is built up, and many investors invest to get a boost in the stock price in the days and weeks following the IPO. And we've already seen that our job is to invest for the 5+ year horizon, so it really doesn't apply to what we are trying to do. Um, if a company is exciting and the prospects are good and you like a certain company that is being listed, you can always look at it 3 to 5 years down the line once the hype has reduced, and then look at how the operations are fared over that period of time and then make a call. It's a trick I like to use when I am looking for investments, where I look at companies that were listed 5 years ago and see, uh, see how it has done and whether it's available at an attractive price. Many times you'll see post IPO the graph go go sideways and not really grow over that period of time. Um, and then finally, we look at we try to avoid companies that have weak governance. This is a vast area by itself, so we won't be able to compare or look at this in great detail. But I'll just quickly cover some of the topics that you could look at to make sure that you avoid companies that have weak governance. You need to look at what kind of investments that company is making, both debt and equity investments. You need to look at the loans and advances line item. What is the amount and level of these loans and advances? Historically, have any of these been written off? What are the disclosure levels? Is the management talking about these kind of investments? Um, you need to look at joint ventures and subsidiaries. Sometimes companies will invest in subsidiaries or joint ventures where the promoter is a shareholder separately. That should be a point of caution. You need to look at related party transactions. So, um, this could be royalty, it could be rent, it could it could be salaries. If promoters are given high levels of salaries, and in the Indian context, many times you have families where there are cousins or second and third generation people who are being paid and are not bringing that much value to the table. Um, Another area I like to look at is preferential allotment of equity or warrants. Uh, you need to examine whether there's a good rationale for that, because the default option really should be to do a rights issue. Um, you need to look at the quality of capital allocation that takes place. Um, if there is poor or frivolous capital allocation, then that is a red flag and you need to avoid those kind of companies. Couple of examples I can think of are if a company is investing in a sports team or is investing in a completely unrelated business that has nothing to do with what the company is actually uh, doing, then some caution is warranted. Weak communication and transparency. We can give some leeway to some of the smaller companies that don't have dedicated investment relation teams to do this, and in some cases you may have to wait till the AGM to ask questions of the company. But if companies are responsive with information, especially with the larger the company, if they're having regular quarterly calls, um, and if they're disclosing and being transparent about their operations, then that is good. If not, then again, you have to avoid those kind of companies. So, in the end, I would say you are not going to get any single company that passes all these areas with flying colors that we have discussed. So don't expect perfection. The job of the analyst or the investor is to make a judgment call given everything, and very importantly make a call whether something is a mountain or a molehill. That distinction is very important. There is no single right answer. So two people with the same strategy and framework could arrive at different portfolios. We've looked at how many companies are available, and you can be really, really selective and come up with a good portfolio in different ways. The best investors make mistakes and correct. So Warren Buffett has always in the past said no to airlines. Then he invested in airlines when he found that the price was very, very attractive. and then after COVID hit, he immediately sold all the airlines. So when the facts change, then you need to take a relook. Uh, be flexible within reasonable constraints. So uh, never say never. There are always exceptions, and all these rules that all these areas that we talked about, they're only thumb rules and only guidelines. And in the end, judgment comes into play. Uh, Build a portfolio. So don't look at one or two or three companies and be too too focused. But at the same time, don't invest in 100 companies, because then you might as well just invest in the index uh, without that much time and effort. So thank you very much.